In the past, the poor neighborhoods have been exploited by persons persons who have been less than American. There's so many of these anti-American, pink, even red organizations.
The FBI and the Department of Justice would learn everything about people in a particular organization. And they did that through wiretaps of telephones, of planting bugs in offices, and using informants.
The Red Squad, there are those units within the police department or any law enforcement unit that have as their function the investigating and looking into organizations that perhaps are a little on the suspect side or have revealed themselves in such a way as to be a little bit questionable.
The FBI broke into our houses, and you would know this because you would come home and you could tell your house had been broken into. Door was locked, nothing was taken except for maybe some papers, but things were rearranged.
The FBI had a way of classifying people who were in the Black Panther Party in many categories, one of which was called the Key Agitator Index. Those were the people who they targeted to be neutralized.
Constitutional rights were not a consideration. They were, in fact, secretly and unilaterally suspended by the FBI with at least the tacit approval of high officials in the federal government for purposes of neutralizing. That's the term that was used within the program itself by those FBI officials who were responsible, neutralized the political activities that were considered objectionable on the part of the Bureau, undertaken by U.S. citizens.
Gee, why don't I just have one of my informants in another organization go out and shoot this guy and make it look like some kind of a mixed-up drug operation, and, you know, have him assassinated. That'll neutralize him for sure.
At approximately 2:45 p.m. this afternoon, 2 men were murdered at the UCLA campus.
At UCLA, you had Bunchy Carter, Alprentice Carter, who was basically the head of the Los Angeles chapter of the Black Panther Party, along with another Panther named John Huggins, who was a key organizer down there, killed by federal undercover personnel, basically, in a classroom at the University of California, Los Angeles. This was in Campbell Hall. And, you know, it was just cold. They were eliminated. The FBI took credit for that result in its internal memoranda.
One agent first told me about the agents, the assassination of Carter and Huggins in Los Angeles, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, sure. But I found out later that he wasn't just joking with me, it was true, from looking into the files.
Had to do with a disinformation campaign in order to set two political organizations, both of which had been infiltrated, at odds with one another, creating a context in which instance certain of the infiltrators could eliminate bona fide activists on the other side. You then have the FBI agent in charge, a guy by the name of Richard Wallace Held, who now runs security for the Visa Corporation. Agent Held talked about how successful the operation had been, and on that basis sought approval for it to be continued. The approval was given. You then have 2 more Panthers who were killed in San Diego.
And I said, those aren't the only 2 assassinations. I said, we had 2 in Chicago.
Most famously, perhaps, and best documentedly, have the Hampton-Clark assassinations. Fred Hampton, deputy chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party.
We didn't talk about a Breakfast with Children program. We've got one. We're not going to tell you how many kids we intend to free and speed in Chicago. We're feeding 3,000 to 4,000 every week already, and I don't know how many all around the country.
And Mark Clark, who was defense captain for a downstate chapter in Peoria, who was staying in the apartment rented by Mr. Hampton on the 4th of December 1969 when the FBI caused a police arms raid to be executed on the premises, the result of which, and this is the cleanest version of it, is that Mr. Hampton and Mr. Clark were shot to death by the police.
And the cops lied about it, and State's Attorney Edward Hanrahan lied about it, and he was clearly in on it. It came out, the family proved it. They did that to decapitate the movement.
We said even before this happened, this, not after I'm locked up, not after everybody's locked up, that you can jail revolutionaries, but you can't jail a revolution. Right. You might run a liberator like Harris Cleave out the country, but you can't run liberation out the country. You might murder a freedom fighter like Bobby Hutton, but you can't murder freedom fighting. And if you do, you come up with answers that don't answer, explanations that don't explain. You come up with conclusions that don't conclude. Nothing's more important than stopping fascism, because fascism will stop us all.
The government wanted to wipe out the Panthers and the Young Lords later, and the American Indian movement, and Weatherman and other parts of the white progressive movements, because they saw that there was something that was in flames and they wanted to put it out. And the easiest way to put it out was counterinsurgency. In the United States, the government isn't supposed to use counterinsurgency against its own citizens.
Pigs' lives have become so extremely outlandish that they were forced to resort to their ultimate weapon: force, organized force, murder, and brutality against black people. And the attacks against the Black Panther Party escalated. The very night, January 17th, 1969, that I was being tortured, Bunchy Carter and John Huggins were shot by the flunkies of this government.
There were numerous false arrests and prosecutions where people spent long time in prison on trumped-up charges.
On April 2nd of 1969, I was rearrested along with 21 other members of the Black Panther Party on charges of conspiracy to murder some pigs, and attacks against our party still escalated.
For example, there was the Panther 21 case in New York where the leadership was basically arrested, spent 2 years in jail before they were acquitted on all charges, but as a result, the New York chapter was virtually decimated.
It was 4 days after they murdered Fred Hampton in his bed in Chicago. They shot at me in the bed and tried to do the same thing.
One of the key agitators and one of the targets to be neutralized that was very important to them was a young Vietnam vet who had come to Los Angeles to study. He went to college at UCLA on the GI Bill. His name was Elmer Geronimo Pratt, and he seemed to have been targeted very, very early on.
I mean, the FBI had gotten rid of Bunchy Carter and John Huggins, and now they got Geronimo Pratt, who took their place, and they got to get rid of him.
Cointel Pro had an intense interest in the Los Angeles Black Panthers, and at a certain point, the LAPD SWAT team attacked the office front on, just cleared the streets and started shooting. Geronimo had taught people how to fortify the office, and they tried to bomb the office, and it had been sandbagged, and so that didn't work. And eventually, people surrendered. Then they really hated Geronimo because they felt that he had frustrated their desire to destroy the office.
Geronimo was not a violent person. He definitely was not. That was the thing that bugged the FBI. Since they had already worked, 2 assassinations, the third one might have been a charm, and they might have been discovered. So they worked out something else, which was just as effective. They got him in jail for 25 years.
They put a murder on me that they were able to manipulate in such a way that it stuck. A murder that would keep me a life sentence.
I was on the squad. I know he was framed.
FBI documents later revealed that their own surveillance placed Geronimo in Oakland at the time of the murders, not in Los Angeles.
I don't think there's any doubt that the decision would have been different if we had the amount of information that is available now. We had no clue as to what the government could do or what they did do. Even though Vietnam was going on, you couldn't believe that your government was doing that at home to one of its own citizens, not only one of its own citizens, one of its own veterans.
And they really put that together in such a way that anything that we did to try to bring out the truth was already preempted, So this is what they used to keep me in prison for 27 years and to criminalize our revolutionary positions.
The whole basis of his political activity, the activity that disturbed the government, that disturbed the status quo, had been essentially neutralized. He was unable to do that, so the mission was accomplished. That was a successful operation.
In the investigation conducted by the United States Senate Committee on Intelligence with respect to governmental operations, short term is the Church Committee, they said, I think it was 235 separate actions of Cointel Pro were targeted against the Black Panther Party. So, you know, every chapter that was of any substance was subjected to this, and there are people who've lost their lives, there are people who've lost their mind, there are people who were completely hostile to anything to do with the Black Panthers because they were abused.
The only reason why I'm here is I disappeared for 4 years, all right, you know. Many of my comrades have fallen, you know, apartments broken into, some had security apartments and been found handcuffed to the chair and shot in the back of the head. So it's a continuum of disruption, or what they call destabilization. Just like they destabilize nations, they're destabilizing the entire radical movement one way or another.
Cointel Pro was a highly secret program, and its crimes might not have been exposed were it not for a group of anti-war activists in Pennsylvania.
April of 1971, some anti-war activists broke into the FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania, which also housed the offices of the Selective Service Administration. And this was a time when there was still a draft. And the goal of these activists was to break in, open the drawers, and burn Selective Service records, draft cards, to keep people from getting drafted. So they broke into this office, started opening up the file cabinets, and lo and behold, it was an FBI office, and they saw documents entitled Counterintelligence Program, Black Nationalist Hate Groups. And they started reading these documents, took them, didn't burn them, thank goodness, and gave them to the press.
In addition, at least 3 domestic subversive targets were the subject of numerous entries from October 1952 to June 1966.
Members of the press did their own investigations, which ultimately then led to, in the mid-1970s, an investigation by Senator Frank Church, which became known as the Church Committee, which conducted an investigation into all aspects of government misconduct and surveillance of political organizations in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s.
We're dealing also with the FBI, a law enforcement agency in this country. And if the law enforcement agencies that are charged with enforcing the law don't themselves obey the law, then who will? Our problem with the CIA has not had to do with its foreign operations, but has had to do with violations of the law, which says that the CIA stays out of the domestic affairs of the United States. There was a real purpose for that. The purpose was trying to preserve a free society and not let an intelligence agency in the name of national security begin to erode away the foundations of freedom in our own land.
What you see is the government taking it upon itself the supervision of what is allowed politically and what is not allowed politically. And when those decisions are made by essentially an organization that's a political police force, such as the FBI, or intelligence agencies like the CIA or the Department of Defense Intelligence, when those